You don't want healing. You want to stop being the one who always has to heal. What if being the black sheep wasn't a curse, but a calling? You've spent years wondering why you never quite fit, why your truth was too much, your emotions too loud, your silence too dangerous. But what if your spiritual isolation was never about rejection, and everything about redirection? The pain you carry might not even be yours. It might be inherited, ancestral, woven into the psychic field of your family like an invisible contract. And you're the one chosen to break it. In this video, we'll dive into the deeper, spiritual meaning behind always being the outsider. Through the lens of Carl Jung, psychoanalysis, ancestral trauma, and emotional exile, we'll unpack the truth that few dare to say out loud. The black sheep isn't broken. They're the mirror, the vessel, the shadow carrier. You'll begin to understand why your difference is actually medicine for your lineage, why your suffering signals a soul mission, and why individuation starts when you stop trying to belong. This isn't about coping. It's about transmutation. If you've always felt like the one who sees too much, feels too deeply, and questions what others worship, you're in the right place. This is for the lone wolves, the intuitive children, the system disruptors. You're not too sensitive. You're too awake. And the world needs that now more than ever. But to step fully into that role, you'll need to reclaim your light, the one they try to dim. So, ready to find out who you really are? The outsider as archetype. Being the black sheep isn't just a family drama. It's often the first sign of a spiritual initiation. Carl Jung understood that the outsider isn't broken, but chosen. A soul tasked with waking up sleeping systems, carrying what others refuse to feel, and embodying what's been exiled for generations. That ache you feel when you're misunderstood, it's not weakness. It's the weight of ancestral truth pressing against your ribs, asking to be lived. You weren't meant to blend in. You were born to disturb the pattern. And yes, that hurts. There's something powerful about realizing your pain didn't start with you. You inherited roles, carried emotional exiles, and got labeled too much or too different by people who hadn't met their own shadow. Jung would call you the carrier of the unconscious, the one who holds what the system buries. In many families, the one who questions, cries, or walks away is branded the problem. But in truth, you're the mirror they don't want to face. And that mirror has purpose. Your pain is a philosophical riddle begging to be solved through individuation. It's tempting to think you're cursed. That being left out means you lack something. But the real story, your presence exposes what's missing in them. You represent soul contrast, the call to integrate what's been avoided. Think of yourself like a disruptive piece of art in a quiet room. Your mere existence shifts the atmosphere. That discomfort is not failure. It's friction meant to ignite transformation. You're not an error. You're a sacred interruption. And that's an art of living most never dare to embody. Rejection? It's often redirection. Being pushed away doesn't always mean you're wrong. It can mean your frequency simply unmasks energetic mismatch. In practical terms, maybe you left a family WhatsApp group because you couldn't stomach the gossip anymore, where you stopped shrinking your voice to keep old dynamics comfortable. That's not betrayal. That's you stepping into the shadow work of breaking generational karma. And when you do that, you stop asking for a seat at tables you were never meant to sit at in the first place. You weren't born to repeat. You were born to rewrite. Carl Jung reminds us that the self isn't found by playing it safe, but by confronting the unconscious. So if you've always felt like the odd one out, maybe that's because you're the one who came to bring the system in. And as you keep confronting your difference, something wild begins to bloom beneath the wounds. Something that will begin to unravel what lies hidden in the psychic field of the family itself. Family is an energetic system. Most people think of family as a collection of individuals, but from a psychoanalytic and energetic perspective, it's more like a psychic ecosystem. Each member plays a part, consciously or not, in keeping that system in balance, even if it means keeping the dysfunction alive. Carl Jung spoke of collective shadow, and nowhere is it more vividly seen than in families. The one who disrupts the flow, the outsider, becomes the identified patient, the mirror that reflects everything the system wants to ignore. And so, resistance isn't personal. It's energetic. Imagine a family dinner where you bring up therapy or trauma healing, and suddenly the room gets quiet. That tension, it's not because you said something wrong. It's because you just cracked a hole in the family's unconscious defenses. You're not being difficult. You're just vibrating at a frequency that reveals imbalance. The system will always react defensively to what threatens its illusion of harmony, especially when that threat carries the potential for evolution. This isn't drama. It's generational physics. When the intuitive child starts questioning roles, patterns, or beliefs, they often become the scapegoat. Not because they're wrong, but because their awareness shines too brightly on what's been suppressed. The black sheep is often the shadow carrier, holding ancestral pain like a living symbol of everything that hasn't been healed. That inner dialogue you've had since childhood, wondering, why do I feel so different, is actually your conscience waking up to a deeper mission. You weren't imagining things. You were tuning into family karma. This explains why some families ostracize the one who breaks patterns. Not because they're toxic, but because they're terrified. It's easier to exile the mirror than face what it reflects. But when you understand the family as an energetic system, you stop internalizing their reaction as a personal failure. You see it as spiritual physics at work. You, the system disruptor, are playing a role that no one asked for, but one that the soul volunteered to carry. That role may be heavy, but it's also profoundly sacred. When people say, "You've changed," they often mean, "You've stopped enabling our unconscious." And that's the beginning of liberation. The human mind likes safety, even if that safety is painful, because change feels like death to the ego. But individuation requires the death of illusion. The outsider archetype doesn't just survive this resistance, they transcend it. And in doing so, they begin to confront the real cost of carrying roles they never agreed to in the first place. Inherited roles and emotional exile. Long before you knew what individuation meant, you were already living it, cast into roles you never chose, performing in an emotional drama written by ancestral hands. Carl Jung would call this an unconscious inheritance. The sensitive child becoming the scapegoat, the intuitive soul cast as the problem. These roles aren't assigned with malice. They're born from unhealed trauma, moving through the psychic bloodstream of the family. You didn't become the black sheep. You were designated as the emotional container for what others refused to carry. The human mind craves clarity, but family systems rarely offer that luxury. The intuitive child, the one who feels everything, becomes the emotional barometer of the household. They sense tension before it's named, pick up guilt without being told, and end up exiled emotionally for simply noticing too much. That exile may come through subtle mockery, dismissiveness, or being labeled too sensitive. But make no mistake, that emotional exile is often the beginning of a spiritual awakening. Rejection becomes the doorway to self-reliance. And yet, that exile hurts. It strips away the illusion of belonging and forces the child to retreat inward. But inside that solitude, something sacred starts to form, the self. As painful as it is, this emotional exile becomes the training ground for spiritual resilience. While others seek identity in belonging, the black sheep finds it in solitude, in journaling instead of shouting, in feeling instead of performing. Artists, healers, and philosophers are often born here, not in applause, but in the echo of silence. Over time, the pain becomes path. The emotional orphan becomes the wisdom carrier. That intuitive child grows up and begins to see patterns, not just in their family, but in society itself. They begin questioning conformity, diving into Carl Jung, shadow work, philosophy, even practical disciplines like journaling, somatic healing, or soul retrieval practices. They're not just healing themselves, they're breaking patterns so ancient they've turned to myth. Every tear cried alone was ancestral sediment being purified from the bloodstream. By the time they reach adulthood, they've become something rare, a soul who knows how to be alone without being lost. And that's dangerous to systems, to roles, to false peace. The black sheep, once shamed for being different, becomes the seer, and the one cast out returns not to belong, but to lead. But to do that, they must first shed the illusion of being a victim and step into something far more powerful. From victim to vessel, there comes a point in every outsider's journey when they must decide, remain wounded or become wise. It's tempting to stay in the pain, to replay the rejection, the silence, the exile. But the truth is, the wound was never meant to be a prison. It was a passage. Carl Jung saw suffering not as a mistake, but as a psychic initiation, the raw material for individuation. You're not broken, you're becoming. And the choice to transmute pain into power is the moment you stop surviving and start alchemizing. The shift happens when you stop asking, "Why me?" and start whispering, "Maybe me for a reason." That doesn't erase the pain, it redeems it. Rejection becomes revelation when you realize your uniqueness wasn't an accident, but ancestral resistance finding a voice through you. Think about it. Every time you chose silence over rage, truth over performance, solitude over conformity, you were interrupting a karmic cycle. You weren't just healing, you were interrupting lineage. That's no small task. This isn't about romanticizing trauma. It's about reclaiming authorship. You're not just the product of a dysfunctional system. You're the vessel through which that dysfunction starts to unravel. A shadow carrier doesn't just hold pain. They transform it. You become the wisdom bearer, the soul with calloused hands and clear eyes. Reading Jung, diving into practical philosophy, journaling at dawn, creating from a scar. These are not hobbies. They're revolutions dressed as rituals. They're how you turn emotional exile into existential clarity. But to do that, you've got to stop outsourcing your worth. The moment you embrace your role as vessel, the need for external validation fades. You become less reactive, more rooted. You stop trying to prove yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That's not arrogance. That's evolution. Spiritual resilience looks like walking into the room you were once exiled from. Not to be accepted, but to bless it and leave. That's power. That's individuation in action. And yet, as you gather strength, a deeper question emerges. What now? If the pain shaped you, but no longer defines you, then what will you carry forward? That's the real turning point. You're no longer here just to survive the family. You're here to liberate it, but not through force, through forgiveness, presence, and a return to self. And that shift, it echoes far beyond your own story. Liberating the family lineage. Healing doesn't just change you, it reshapes the entire timeline. Carl Jung taught that what is unconscious in one generation becomes fate in the next. So when the black sheep begins to individuate, to bring shadow into light, they're not just creating personal peace, they're breaking ancestral contracts. Your growth ripples backward. Every boundary you set, every belief you question, every truth you finally speak, that's generational healing echoing through time, shaking the bones of those who came before you. Most families unconsciously assign roles, then get confused when you stop playing them. But when you stop performing, the performance ends, and that threatens the system. It takes spiritual resilience to keep going. You'll be called selfish, cold, not like you used to be. But that's exactly the point. You're not here to repeat the past. You're the system disruptor, the soul contrast, the archetype of transformation. You were never meant to carry the karmic burden forever. You were meant to break it open. Liberation isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like soft refusal, like not reacting when provoked, like walking away from manipulation without apology, like ending the emotional tug-of-war you've been looped into for years. These are not just personal victories. They're sacred acts of defiance. And as you do this, you embody the very medicine your lineage lacked: emotional clarity, spiritual autonomy, intuitive truth. You become the alchemical vessel that transmutes dysfunction into wisdom, not by force, but by presence. Forgiveness, here, isn't permission, it's severance. It's the psychic sword that cuts the cord to roles that no longer serve you. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve freedom. In doing so, you dissolve the energetic contracts written in silence, shame, and fear. You return, not to belong, but to stand as your true self. No more contortion, no more performance. Just you, luminous, whole, and unapologetically not who they try to mold. And as you stand there, freer than anyone in your family has ever dared to be, you might notice something unexpected: peace. Not the shallow kind built on pretending, but the deep kind forged through fire. You didn't come to save them. You came to remember yourself. And in doing so, you've already begun to rewrite the story for those yet to come. What if your pain was never random, but a code only you could decode? You weren't born into your family by accident. You're the black sheep because you were built to feel what others numb, to question what others accept, to heal what others pass down. So the real question is, will you keep shrinking to fit systems that can't hold your light? Or will you finally stand as the vessel you were born to be? That ache in your chest, it's not weakness, it's wisdom trying to surface. What would change if you stopped waiting for them to understand you and started understanding yourself? Your soul mission isn't about proving your worth. It's about remembering it. Start where you are. Journal the unspoken. Study Carl Jung. Learn to sit with your shadow. Create art from your story. Speak what's been silenced in your lineage for generations. You don't need anyone's permission to heal. The system doesn't need your obedience. It needs your transformation. That's how cycles break. So now I ask you, are you brave enough to carry the light they were too afraid to hold? If you felt seen, cracked open, or strangely validated by this video, that's not coincidence. That's your soul remembering. If this spoke to you, then hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and keep walking this path with me. Because we're just getting started, and your story has only begun to unfold.